Usman Khan, a terrorist extraordinaire from the UK, with, believe it or not, links to Pakistan. Shocking, a terrorist with links to Pakistan. I know, my world's been rocked by this news, and so has yours. But he was convicted for Al-Qaeda-inspired terrorist bombing plots in 2012. He was let out on an early release because he was deradicalized. Now, it showed this article from BBC on deradicalization. But the London Bridge bomber, Usman Khan, completed an untested rehabilitation scheme. Now, all the rehabilitation courses are untested, but we implement them anyway, and then when people complete these untested schemes, we say they work. There's an interesting line in the article here where it does mention this is kind of like the sex offender rehabilitation scheme, which was running for 25 years until studies showed that actually increased recidivism and did not decrease it. That's right, people who went through sex offender rehabilitation increased, didn't decrease. And this should not be news to anyone with a 100 or 200 level psychology course under the back. No, I do have a degree in psychology, so we're using the psychology degree for the 3rd time this year. Oh, this is a crazy year. Now, there are many, many, many other things that we just do and we don't research beforehand, and a lot of the reasons we do it is because it sounds nice. There's another test, rehabilitating sociopaths or psychopaths. There's also a rehabilitation course that we used to run them through. It turns out that the only thing that the sociopathy or psychopathy courses did was teach sociopaths and psychopaths how to mask their behavior better. So it didn't cure anyone of sociopathy. It just made sociopaths go, oh, this is what people are looking for on the sociopath test. These are the lies I tell counselors to get me out of early release. So it helped a bunch of sociopaths and psychopaths get back on the streets earlier by teaching them how to say things to fool useful idiots. Shocking. Now, the number one thing they actually use in psychology, and I'll go into, is PTSD training. A bunch of do-gooders figured, hey, some people after they get post-traumatic stress disorder don't go into counseling. So we should make counseling after traumatic events mandatory. And what this did was actually increase the rates that people would develop PTSD. And the reason this is because when you're sort of primed with the knowledge of, some people cope differently. Like some people can just say, that was a crazy thing. It was one night. I was in that fire. I was in that terrorist attack. It's over. I cope differently. But when you're forced into counseling and you're forced to relive this event and you're forced to say, oh, you're in PTSD counseling, you go, well, maybe I did experience some PTSD. And then you think about it and you're more likely to develop PTSD. So a lot of things have been eventually phased out. But even though there are sort of examples out there on why we shouldn't do this, and there's a lot of data on why you shouldn't just do things without the data firsthand, we tend to throw this logic out whenever the concept of social justice or progressive ideology gets involved. And one of these things is terrorism de-radicalization. We had Usman Khan and another person who was involved in in his initial terrorist plot in 2012, the Al-Qaeda-inspired one. He also reoffended. So the de-radicalization program has no evidence that it works. And as of yet, there is no evidence. No, okay. There is no what I would qualify as empirical evidence to state that de-radicalization programs work. Now, every country has one, and people pass these de-radicalization programs, and then they're released, although we have no evidence that it works, and now some counter evidence to the contrary. And this is very likely, it's like the sociopath test that I mentioned, because what this probably teaches terrorists and Islamists and extremists to do is what to say to counselors to get them out on early release. So the de-radicalization program probably just teaches terrorists how to get out early and what to say to avoid detection. This is probably what it does, if it goes along these lines. Now, a lot of Canadians are probably concerned with what I'm telling you right now, because we have 400 plus ISIS fighters, and this is not to count the other radicals that we've sent overseas, just walking around Canada. And do we have a de-radicalization program? Well, it was put out, and then there was 6 pages, the report put out last year. Now, there is one thing, have faith, there is one thing that the Canadian de-radicalization program has that the United Kingdom de-radicalization program doesn't have. And that is poems. Yes, that is right. We are going to fight ISIS with the power of poems. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, this program didn't get any real funding. So the poems that will be written won't actually be read to the jihadists. It will just, academics will write poems just for the hell of it, and we hope the jihadists We'll read it. Now, this is crazy. This is patently crazy. This is a crazy program. And clearly, the only thing crazy about this is the poems are not being read to the ISIS members. Because as we all know, if the ISIS members hear a poem, well, then how could they still be part of ISIS? So, tonight, here on Uninterrupted, I have designed a poem that will de-radicalize every single terrorist on planet Earth. So, ISIS fighters, all 400 of you roaming around Canada, and ISIS fighters everywhere, and Al-Qaeda people, gather around. So come here, sit down by your computer. I know the Muslim Brotherhood front groups are watching this, so if you can send it to the terrorists you're funding, this would help immensely improve your image. So just, terrorists, come here, sit down, bring your friends into the room, take some time, put down your suicide vests and your Vote Liberal lawn signs, and let's get ready to be de-radicalized. Are you ready to save Western civilization? I'm with you. All right. The thought of infidels makes you mad. So you chartered a flight to Baghdad, and you joined up with ISIS because they had the best ad. Because you saw a brochure and thought, sex slaves? That sounds pretty rad. But now you're in jail, paying for all the good times you've had, stuck in a counseling session with a gullible hipster in plaid. So you tell him a phony sob story about your dad, and how he was mean to you when you were just a wee lad. Now you're free because some useful idiots thought the radical Islam was just a passing fad. So you're off to a bridge to stab some dude named Chad. But hold up a minute there, Farhad. Did you know that terrorism is actually bad? It turns out that all the raping and murdering, it makes people sad. And that is why you should quit the jihad. Terrorism over. You're welcome. Did I just save Western civilization, or did I just save Western civilization? Thank you, thank you. And I just want to thank the Canadian government and Justin Trudeau for giving me the ideas. By the way, I've completely sold out now. Because I have adopted this, the government funding for the media, it's now been doubled, so the $1 billion media bribe. I am now in the running for it. I am assuming I'm going to get a couple $100,000 from the government. I'd just like to thank the glorious leader, Justin Trudeau, for this amazing idea. And what's that? Oh, it's reality. It says, no, I'm not getting any of that federal funding for the media. So, if you like this show, you could support us on Patreon or PayPal to keep us independent, and maybe keep me out of jail when the Muslim Brotherhood tries to sue me. Now, ISIS fighters, if you have any questions or comments about that poem, just remember, my name is Justin Trudeau, and I live in Ottawa. You can find me there. All right. Now, on a more realistic note, more serious note, it's kind of obvious that I don't believe that poetry is the way to de-radicalize terrorists. I know, shocking. You're shocked. I've lied to you. Your world's been flipped on its axis. Poems might not work. There actually might be another terrorist attack in the world after this poem came out. I know. But okay, so why are these de-radicalization programs going? Now, there is the obvious radical left agenda here. But then there's also the sort of standard government shadiness. Often failed programs like de-radicalization programs, they're usually just a way to fund federal dollars to supporters of the party. It's like, you meet some social workers who promote the liberal cause, and you pay them money to de-radicalize people. So it's like kind of a I scratch your back, you scratch mine. This is kind of how politics works. There's a lot of that element to it, so it's just natural political corruption is why you get programs like this. But also there is a heavy naivety to the progressive movement, especially on terrorism. And probably the captain of "We Can Hug the Jihad Away" is Justin Trudeau, right? This is the Obama Cairo speech 2009. And I thought he had solved terrorism. Granted, I was 17 at the time, so let's cut me a break. But when Barack Obama went up in Cairo in 2009 and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, America's sorry, and America being mean causes terrorism," I thought, well, terrorism solved. But then things got worse. And one of the things we have to sort of acknowledge, especially here in Canada, but on the terrorism debate, and not a lot of people want to have this debate, one, because the Conservative Party is too scared to even touch the topic, and two, the progressive left doesn't like their arch nemesis, which is reality. And the reality of the situation when it comes to ISIS is Canada sent more foreign fighters to fight for ISIS than America did. Okay? Canada has about 35 million people. America has over 350 million people, which means they're 10 times our population. So you scale this, and we sent more fighters in raw numbers, not proportionally. We didn't send, 20% of their fighters, which would actually be double the amount if you'd scale it by proportion. No. We sent on proportion, like, as a Canadian, you are more than 1,000% more likely to go fight for ISIS than you are as an American. Now, the narrative that the left wants to say on terrorism, and Justin Trudeau embodies wholly, is, well, terrorism is really caused by bullying and Islamophobia. If people weren't so mean to Muslims, they wouldn't be exploding all the time. This is the narrative. Now, it completely takes agency out of the hand of Islam, but if that is true, you would have to say that Canada is 1,000, or it's 10 times, sorry, not 1,000. Canada would be 10 times, at least, maybe 11. Canada is 10 times as Islamophobic as America is, right? If you want, at least, right? To make the numbers make sense, if that is your ideology, that would have to be true. If Islamophobia leads to terrorism, then that would have to be true as a primary cause. It isn't. Now, the counter-argument here, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, is permissibility of extremism not countering extremist ideology leads to more extremist ideology. So Canada, and it is known by ISIS fighters, we have information from the Kurdish military that ISIS fighters in jail consider Canada, and I quote, a safe haven. So it is known by the ISIS fighters in jail that they all want to get to Canada because they see Canada as a safe haven. Right? This is Jack Lett's Jihadi Jack. The British revoked his citizenship, Justin Trudeau didn't. Right? Justin Trudeau is the Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Right? He got up there in the Liberal debate and he was laughed at. Is the Liberal Party believes that a terrorist should be able to keep his citizenship because I do. And that's absurd. And then Omar al-Ghabra, who in himself is also a proponent of extremist ideology or Islamist ideology, did an interview with Pakistani language television Canada, and he basically reassured the Pakistan community that no, Canadians will not be lose their citizenship if they're convicted of terrorism or pedophilia charges, which is a very interesting thing to bring up. Like, this is your appeal to the Pakistani community? Like, hey, Pakistan, listen, I know you're very concerned about what happens, about terrorists and pedophiles, but don't worry, we got the back of terrorists and pedophiles. A very interesting thing for Omar al-Ghabra to say. And I say Omar al-Ghabra is a proponent of extremist ideology because he is on the record wanting to bring Sharia law to Ontario, and then when Sharia law was defeated in Ontario, and it was defeated a lot because TAG TV and the Muslim owner here putting out the counter-argument that most Muslims actually didn't want Sharia law in Ontario. They escaped countries with Sharia law, and they are in Canada because of that. He excoriated the Muslims, which was over 60 to 70% of Muslims in Ontario, that voted against instituting Sharia law. And I think of this as extremist, because wanting to supplant Canadian law with Sharia law is extremist. And it's also not the majority opinion of the Canadian Muslim. But here we have a country and a leader which will hug and share platforms with Muslims or Islamic organization that espouse extremist ideology. Right? This is the Carrying the Light conference of Islamist nonsense. Right? Every year the ISNA, the ICNA, Muslim Association of Canada, they get together and put on this conference, and Justin Trudeau talks about their shared values for Canada. And just for an example, in the ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, the Islamic Society of North America recently received $24,000 and $600 whatever, around $25,000 of summer jobs funding. Now, the summer jobs program in Canada is very controversial because you have to issue a statement that you're 100% on abortions all the time. You agree with abortions up to the moment of birth, 100%. This was the new controversy Trudeau created. Like, you have to be super, like, you have to love abortions, right? Basically, you have to punch a pregnant woman in the stomach in order to get summer jobs funding. They received summer jobs funding. However, earlier in that year, the ISNA itself was suspended by the CRA for their, I believe, second or third, it's different, but their second suspension for terrorism funding. I think they were fined once before, but they were just caught funding terrorism for the third time. So the Canadian government said, oh, they're funding terrorism for a third time. They were giving money to Hezbollah Mujahideen, which is basically the Hamas of Kashmir. Right? They were sending hundreds of thousands of dollars to them. It's their third terrorism funding violation. And while they were under charitable suspension, they still received funding from the Canadian government. Right? And all these Islamist Muslim Brotherhood front groups, they're all propped up as spokespeople and proxies by the Canadian government and the Canadian media as the voices of Muslim Canadians, which I say is harmful, which I say leads to more terrorism. Right? Because when you're more hardline against this, right, it's not that easy. It's not that hard to find liberal Muslims. Right? They own this studio. You can find them. Right? They're in the majority. But the government and the media seem dead set on propping up Islamists as a representative of this community. So when you prop up these Islamist organizations with both funding and material support and sort of political support, well, then the average, Muslim family can say, oh, if I want my daughter to get into politics, a good job, I'll send them to this Muslim Brotherhood proxy group because all the politicians are meeting with it, so it looks legitimate. They're not going to search through all this stuff and say, oh, wait a minute, Hamas, whoa. And then they get into these programs, and then they're exposed to the radicalization programs within these extremist groups. And you see that today. I mean, there's just a story today. I saw it. We don't have time to put it up. But in Mississauga, at the Palestinian Solidarity Conference, there was a bunch of children on stage singing a song glorifying violence against infidels, specifically Jews. And as I've said, these are the issues like Kashmir, Israel, that they use, they call human rights things, and they launder extremist ideology through Muslim Brotherhood proxy groups into the Canadian public. This then radicalizes our current Muslim population, and then you see that Canadians have more people joining ISIS than most other countries because of our sort of progressive values. So this is my point on it, right, is I say that progressive ideology and capitulation to Islamism leads to more terrorism. What you would call Islamophobia, or being hardline against radical Islam, actually leads to less radical Islam. I think it's a rather simple case to make. And also, de-radicalization programs clearly don't work. Clearly. All right. Now, if you like the show, again, please, because obviously this is not getting government funding, so if you want to support us on Patreon or PayPal with a one-time donation, I would love that. It helps keep the show going. Then we can rant and ramble and hopefully eventually pay my legal bills when they come from me. All right.